Dragon Quest is a series I've been trying to get into for a long time. Its art style and gameplay have held my interest for years, but I'm finally proud to say after playing Dragon Quest III, I'm now a big fan of this series. In this video, I want to discuss my experience as a newcomer, and how this remake made it such an enjoyable experience to someone who had no idea the series was this good. As a new player to this series, Dragon Quest III does a fantastic job of setting up the world and all the strife and conflicts that have been occurring, and sets the hero on a journey by answering a series of questions to help set a personality type, which I thought was something unique and not something I'm really used to. Then, all of a sudden, you're a gargoyle going around killing people and pets if you like. I didn't know if this was from the choices that I had selected, but I have to admit it was pretty fun and goofy and really helped set the tone of the game for me. Then being called a spoiled brat and being told I need to do better and rely on others' support to help reach my goals before closing the prologue was also a humorous touch to end it before being thrust into the first arc of the story. I was unaware of what direction the story would go, as the player's journey begins on his 16th birthday, and in a series of flashbacks, his father has left his family to go on an adventure to fight the evils of the world and hasn't returned from the trip to the volcano. And so, you set off to follow in his footsteps as Ortega was a proper legendary warrior, and the archfiend Baramos is suspected to be behind his disappearance and the troubles that plague the world. With your objectives set, you are also expected to select some companions for your journey, each with a different job class and personality type and the ability to set attributes to your liking. I chose the mage, priest, and warrior to start, but each class seemed to have some pros and cons, so I went with what I felt most familiar with from other experiences. I will talk a bit more on the job system as well, and a more detailed look at combat and mechanics later on in the video. The game is also really good about clearly outlining objectives for you, so you don't go around wandering aimlessly, wandering in the open world, and telling you exactly what item or items you need to progress a story. For example, the first major item you get is a wrecking ball, otherwise known as a bomb, to help you get across the roadblock in your journey. This also lends up the game's humor, which you might say is rather tongue-in-cheek, and really felt unique to Dragon Quest itself. The way Dragon Quest III transitions between story points is also its use of dungeons in the game. I view this as sort of a check for the player to not only see if they were truly ready to progress, but if grinding was needed to really feel secure going forward. The Path of Promise was really the first test for the player, and not only that, but these dungeons are also full of useful items to aid you in your journey, so you really don't have to spend money at the item shops so long as you search every floor for treasures. Once you finally get out of what felt like a sprawling dungeon in the first of many in our adventure, we also find out about monster wrangling, which you can think of like a giant subquest within our larger quest and something worth working towards that you tend to naturally find in your explorations of the world. As you get into your first major town in Romeria, a bigger challenge awaits, finding and defeating Robin Hood, and then getting the King's Crown. A strange thing to take, but what better opportunity to prove that we're up to the task, and truly the son of the great Ortega. After a few pit stops along the way, our hero arrives at Skyfell Tower, something you can consider another level check dungeon, and where a notable jump in enemy difficulty occurs. You also begin to see some variety in the enemies as well, thus altering your strategy on how to traverse this dungeon. Another small detail is NPCs within the dungeon also help give you tips on how to succeed against enemy types as well, and something so small is a good addition to someone new like me, who at the time wasn't all the way up on the mechanics yet. As you make it to the top of the tower, this boss Robin Hood was a bit goofier than what I was expecting initially, but he was giving me Monty Python type humor from his delivery, which I admit was really enjoyable. I may have been a little underleveled, or at least what felt like it, but the subsequent battle felt really high stakes, and, given its context, finally defeating him and his goons felt really great. Yeah, first Dragon Quest boss defeated, so I gave myself a pat on the back. Also, I had to let him go. I felt bad if I didn't, and the scenes afterward were pretty comedic with him leaving his crew high and dry, while he saves his own skin, and we get the King's Crown back as a reward. But, of course, things were going so well that we are asked with getting one last thing before we can go any further, the magic key. The overworld for me really began to feel even bigger at this point as I made my way to Asham, and subsequently to the Pyramid, and our next dungeon to test our resolve. I viewed this dungeon as a sort of challenge dungeon for the player in that there were traps, a high encounter rate of enemies, to which you get even more variety, and you couldn't use magic, making this an incredibly frustrating one for me, and at the time was a bit of a struggle to get through. I'd like to call it my first roadblock on this journey. Not to mention, this boss battle was also quite a step up, and provides an ominous warning about what sorts of dangers lies ahead as we hear even more about Baramos. This dude must be insane whenever we finally meet him. After obtaining the magic key from our last dungeon, the King of Portuga then asks you to get him a pepper? Yeah, that kind of threw me off, but apparently this is essential to the story, and we also come to find out our father took the same journey through the land as we have, and thus the game takes us to Bararata to get this special pepper, which, wouldn't you know, they happen to be fresh out of. Never that simple, is it? Well, this fellow Gopal will be able to help us get this pepper, but first we have to help him find and save his girl. A fair enough trade, I suppose. We are the hero after all. As Gopal foolishly gets imprisoned in the kidnapper's cave, we free him and his girl, but not before running into old Robin Hood again, and beating his ass a second time. Yet another quality boss battle with the lad and his men, which got considerably stronger than the last time we saw them. Predictably, after his defeat, he runs away and promises to go clean. Why don't I believe him on this? So anyway, just when you think we are going to get this damn pepper because you haven't been through enough already, Gopal doesn't have any and sends us off to All Trades Abbey to find his buddy, who gives us one and puts us out of our misery. This area is also significant because you can chain jobs out of current party members to roles you haven't used yet. I will admit I only used it once, and I changed my mage into a sage, but again, you can't really even do that until level 20 anyway. Okay, I also want to note that this game's pacing to this point has been pretty good, and the way the world is set up, you can take as little or as long as you want, and you never really feel pressured to go forward. There's enough to explore to keep you busy and leveled up too, even if it can feel pretty grindy after a while, but I want to cover that in more detail later on. As the king is a man of his word, you get a pretty sweet trade of getting a ship for getting his pepper, and a little cutscene with the entity from the intro telling us we now have to gather different colored orbs throughout the land and handle any evildoers in the process. Much like some of the earlier cities you visited, you are recognized in Mir as looking an awful lot like Ortega, and this city provides further context of what kind of warrior and person your father was. He was nursed back to health there, and after nearly dying and returning the favor by helping the village by killing monsters, and we even get his helm, which is not only a great piece of gear, but shows us that we are fulfilling his legacy, as he was fondly known as Peredviznik. Showing it to your mom also gets a heartwarming little cutscene to put things into perspective for you. Now, your journey for these orbs wouldn't be complete without a couple puzzles now, would it? Adina, which you can't even get into until you get some fancy Jenny, and I'll admit, I was a bit of an idiot trying to figure this out until legit the light switch came on and I figured out the sequence. Maybe you guys struggled there too. Completing this puzzle gets you the bottomless pot item, which then takes you into the middle of the ocean and reveals a shrine with the ultimate key, which is of course a fantastic item as you can now open any door in the world. As I recalled, I was stuck in Thedon, wondering what I had to do to open the door to the cell, and this was why. Also, why this area was so quiet was because there was a boss battle with some dying flames who weren't ready to let me have that green orb just yet. It felt pretty good beating that particular boss, and then the ghost prisoner, who was apparently waiting for us this whole time, tells us that we need to get all the orbs in the world and take it to the summit in Ringland. Pretty straightforward questline, I'd say. Another fun sub-quest you can do in the interim is to get the King of Romeria's crown back and be all kingly walking around, but I got bored of it pretty quickly and gave it back to continue on. But it was a nice little goofy thing to include to break up the seriousness for a bit. Remember earlier how I said you can kind of just take the game as it comes and not follow a linear path? Well, I put that to the test unknowingly as I wound up in Minoza and started a whole quest line about a king who was imprisoned and an imposter had taken his place, which takes you into another dungeon to get something called Ra's Mirror. Reason you needed that mirror? Well, apparently that helps reveal monsters, and the king was indeed a troll, who, once defeated after a super long boss battle, warns us again about Baramos. Well, let's hope this dude lives up to the hype here because his henchmen are the best at gassing up his abilities. The significance of defeating the troll is highlighted in the next cutscene as the entity of light, who had been guiding us on our journey, tells us we now also have to find more magical items in our quest, in addition to the orbs as well, those being a magical staff, bones on a ghost ship, and a sword on top of a volcano, or at least the looks of it. The mod rod given by the King of Minosa seems to fit the first bit too, so we're already on the right foot. One part of the game I found particularly funny in the sense of tone was Gaia's navel, which as you progress further and further, the stone golems try to first scare you, and then eventually do the Monty Python type humor and still getting you to try and leave. Definitely appreciated that small detail in the game. As this dungeon is a trial for the hero's strength, defeating the Chiromancer, another one of Baramos' henchmen, gives us another fancy orb, this time blue. The next area I stumbled upon was probably my favorite in the game, was the Jipang questline. I liked it not only for the look and its music of the area, but for the quest given to the hero to investigate why they're going to sacrifice Yayoi, who had disappeared, and its consequences on the town with Orochi the dragon, who not only had a fun little dungeon to explore, but was a great boss that had 2 stages, and it really tested how good I was at the game. And, not only that, finding out that Orochi was also the queen of the village the whole time. Wasting little time after this, I also found the old man from the dream and gave him his magic rod while getting the bones I need to get to the ghost ship. Easy peasy, right? It's also worth noting that the area you can sometimes forget about, even with the game telling you, is to check into the town where you had dropped the merchant to help build from earlier, which I aptly called Merchiburg. Anyway, our buddy ends up getting too big for our britches, and the town revolts against him and throws him in jail, but not before he tells you where the yellow orb is. I should also tell you that I check in on this guy numerous times, but nothing ever really happens until you advance other parts of the story beforehand. Otherwise, you just waste a great deal of time finding out that nothing happens, which I guess is my own fault for not knowing this. Afterwards, I took a trip to First Spire to get the Echo Flute, which is an essential item for later. I bring this area up in particular since I can't tell you how many times I fell off the little rope maze and got frustrated, not landing on the spot I needed to, but hey, all's well that ends well. I also wasted little time. Actually, no, that's a lie. It took me what felt like ages trying to get to the ghost ship with the game's encounter rate, but once I got there, I really enjoyed the aesthetics of the place and quickly found the Lover's Locket and got the hell out of there, because why stay longer than you need to? I was hyped and ready to keep advancing the story no matter what at this point. In one of the more heart-wrenching scenes in the game, the reason you got the Lover's Locket was to see the scenes with Eric and Olivia, who in death are finally together at last and fade off into dust, reunited by love. How cute. It also opens up the Shrine of Shackles, and we meet the spirit of someone who was very close with our father, Simao of Mendoza, a great warrior in his own right, who stood by our father's side slaying monsters and anyone who would seek to destroy the world. With him, and our father having gone separate ways, at some point he must have been captured and imprisoned there, and he gives us the mountain cleaver to throw into the volcano. That was a sad way to go for Simao, and we never really hear from him again either. Ascending Mount Necrogon, you really felt like there was a genuine tension and something really bad was about to go down. Sure enough, after you throw the sword into the volcano, you have to fight the Garboil boss. Another pretty high-stakes battle with this one, who even alluded to having run into our father at some point too, who, once shown to us again, is just an incredible badass taking on a whole bunch of monsters by himself before what presumably is either getting gravely hurt or killed in the magma. The whole purpose of using that sword was to open up a new area, which, to be honest, I used to grind for the later part of the game, so I wasn't underleveled, and it allows you to get some pretty great items too. The last 2 orbs I got were pretty easy in consideration to the others. As the yellow, I just went to the pirate's hideout and simply took it and never looked back, whereas with the silver orb, I got it at the end of the Maw of the Necrogon dungeon. And with that, we are finally ready to place the orbs at the altar and awaken Ramia, the Everbird. I have to say, as a new player, I wasn't really aware of the significance of this majestic thing, but seeing it awaken from the egg with all that holy light was truly something special. Then, flying in the overworld with the soft music playing really helps put your accomplishments in this game into perspective. Really was an amazing feeling. I'm glad I got that out of the way because guess what? It's now time to face Baramos and end this thing. I will come clean and say that for the endgame, this dungeon felt a little more set up like the Tower of Transcendence, which you saw earlier in the game with the layout and sadly a really rough encounter rate in this area. But after many battles and lots of item gathering beforehand, we finally meet the prick who's been causing all this trouble. Baramos was not something I would say was an easy battle per se, but given the context of these other battles, he wasn't near as bad as I was thinking, but they no doubt hit you like a freight train and force you to play smart. Sign of a great boss, no doubt, design-wise. Okay, great, guys, we did it, yay. We saved the kingdom from certain doom, and everyone's happy now, and even our mom is there to join us. What a great moment. But that moment was short-lived as the ceremony gets interrupted by our new foe, Zoma, Lord of the Underworld, and a guy of the Shadows. Obviously they want us dead, and, well, we can't just have that now, can we? Job's not done yet, guys. That night, you share a special moment with your mom again before facing the unknown and the true endgame of Dragon Quest III. After hugging Mom goodbye, we have to now go to the castle that came to us in our dreams and see where we must go now. If you remember, it sounded like Zoma just gave us a map to come see him. Finding the Dragon Queen's castle was another cool area, and the Dragon Queen tells us all about Zoma and how to get to the underworld, and while she's dying, she gives us the means to battle the darkness with her orb of light and leaves behind an egg of her child. Man, this game is really great at pulling on your emotions with these cutscenes, isn't it? As you go to the Pit of Gaga, you are literally just dropped into the underworld and you can no longer use Ramia, so your travels just got a lot harder. Once again, the encounter rate at least felt like it went up again in the open areas of the map, and definitely made what is a relatively short section of the game feel much longer. The cities like Tantagel, Damdara, and Remilder help provide some context into what life is like in the underworld, and it's a miracle that they're also positive, living in the shadow of Zoma. One thing that I did on my journey, and I'm sure more veteran players already do this, but I made sure to get the Sword of the Kings and the Hero Shield before even setting foot in Zoma's Citadel. Traversing the Talantir Tunnel to get the shield was particularly arduous but well worth the reward. Much like in the early part of the game, you need to find an item that lets you proceed to the final stages, that being the Fairy Flute. What surprised me was how easy it was to get when compared against the other stuff in the game, but at this point, I was very well ready to be in a position to finish the story and see what happens. And that is not a negative aspect of the game either. The Tower of Rubus is your last stop really before the Citadel, and I'm going to be upfront and say that the arrow puzzles were not really all that fun, but the dungeon itself had a nice enemy variety, and getting another crack at the soul of Bear Moss was a nice touch. This guy just does not want to die, does he? Oh, and that voice guiding us the whole game was actually an ally of Rubus, and Rubus herself is the goddess of Alefgard, and, given her power has not yet returned, we are asked to help in her stead and save life as we know it. As she leaves us to her mission, we get the sacred amulet and have to take that to her shrine to bless it and then turn it into the rainbow drop, finally allowing us to access the Citadel in the final section of the game. I had done everything I could getting the best armor and gear to this point and felt pretty powerful in my own right, even if I was a little underprepared for what happens at the Citadel. For a final dungeon, the encounter rate alone was pretty frustrating. What felt like every 2 steps I had to fight off multiple strong enemies, and the sub-bosses in this dungeon, like the Stone Guardians, dealt massive damage and had me wondering if I should have leveled up more beforehand. As you descend further into the castle, I knew this moment would happen. Seeing our father fighting off a Hydra and getting closer and closer, fighting off our own set of enemies, only to get close and to watch him become fatally wounded, and the worst part is him not recognizing that we are his son, and having him die in our arms really felt like a gut punch as we were following in his footsteps this whole adventure. As he turns to dust, my resolve grew strong, and the desire to kill Zoma no matter what forced me to push on and get past all the puzzles and enemies until I finally got to his chamber. What took me by surprise was that you had to battle 4 different types of bosses, each pretty challenging in their own right, and even Bear Moss being a part of this group, who finally died at long last before we get to Zoma. An important note here is the game is at least forgiving enough to let you leave and rearm yourself and heal up before each battle, so you aren't practically dead before the finish line. I will say it was nice to relive some of the older battles too, just with an extra layer of difficulty added on, which is something both new and old players can respect. Alright, now we're finally going to face Zoma. Not only is he talking big shit before this battle, like any good final boss would, but he's also protected himself with a layer of darkness and is immune to certain attacks, which I personally didn't know about until the game prompted me to then use the Sphere of Light. Luckily, I hadn't died at that point and weakened him, and I suppose you could beat him without using it, but full disclosure, I was too new at the series to even try such a challenge. After a long battle, I definitely fist-pumped when I defeated him, and while you think it's over, Zoma seems to allude that there's even more to come for us and potentially even worse. Doesn't sound great, but we can deal with that as it comes. Maybe in the next game? Light now shines upon Alefgard and the evil is defeated. As we report to the king, we come to find that the path has been sealed and we are stuck in Alefgard. But with our victory, we must help the kingdom stand on its own, and we are granted the title of Erdrick, the land's chosen hero. And the closing ceremony really puts this all into perspective of the significance of your success, as you, the hero, then walk away leaving your sword, armor, shield, and amulet behind to be passed down through the ages. Thus, the seeds of salvation were sown. But wait, the game ends on a cliffhanger as the priest is talking to the egg left by the Dragon Queen, and will see to it that it grows up into a leader of the land upon his name, Argon. Hell of a way to finish it and to prepare myself for the upcoming 1 and 2 remakes as well. Non-story related, but new to the HD remakes are some optional dungeons and super side bosses you can also do if you feel like, and to be honest, I only made it to 1 and I thought that was enough. The challenge is something I want to come back to later and see if I have what it takes. But all that being said, this game's story and its characters within were fantastic and really surpassed my expectations as I haven't played any of these games before. Now, let's talk about another aspect of the game and my thoughts therein. Its combat and mechanics. Dragon Quest III has some of the simplest combat in a JRPG, and this is not a bad thing. These days, it seems many developers try to go for flash and add lots of bells and whistles to make their games more challenging, and to me, the simplicity of Dragon Quest III just works. When you enter a battle, you really only have three main options: attack, flee, or defend. Within that, you can cast spells for offense, defense, or heal, and even render status effects like sleep or throwing an enemy from the battle. It was great to really not have to overthink what I was doing and just be able to focus on using my turns to the best of my abilities. Something new to the remake is the ability to use abilities, like for the hero, using Flame Slash or Gale Slash. To piggyback off that, enemies can also now use abilities against you, adding another layer to its combat. There is something to be said about just some good old classic turn-based JRPG gameplay, and that's exactly what Dragon Quest III is. Something minor, but also cool, is seeing your new weapons in battle, which apparently was not a thing in the original game, but a nice subtle touch. You can also adjust the speed of battle to make grinding a little bit less tedious, and there's also the ability in the remake to have weapons that have multi-hit options that are able to crit. Again, this is a very small change, but a positive one. The developers have also added defense to its own stat, whereas in the original it was rolled into agility. So, for me, someone completely new to this, it just makes a lot more sense for it to be this way. Your HP and MP also get restored when you level up, so you aren't panicking thinking that you won't make it to a save point or in before game over, taking some stress away from the player. The remake has also added new spells to the game, like Zen for example, which allows you to not have to go to a church just to revive an ally. Within the overworld, you can now see sparkling items, allowing you to get valuable items or things to use or sell without any fuss of trying to find them blindly. Again, this is a very minor change, but with dungeons you also have a mini-map, which avoids any confusion on behalf of the player, so you know exactly where you're going. Dragon Quest III also has vocations and personality types when making a new ally. You can have up to 10 types of vocations like Hero, Monster Wrangler, Sage, and Gadabout. Within this, you can either automatically select or manually select your attribute sets for Strength, Wisdom, etc., and have your full toolkit, so to speak. Personality can also affect these attributes, so it's important to pick one that you like best, or to leave it to chance like I did. Ultimately, what party composition you go with is up to you, but I chose to go with Hero, Sage, Warrior, and Priest, and it seems like it was a pretty good choice overall. You can also change your classes at the All Trades Abbey, but I only did this once myself. Another cool thing about Dragon Quest III is collecting monsters and being able to go to the arenas for battle. It makes it worth it to collect as many as you can, and get items in doing so from the vendor. All in all, as a new player, I was pretty surprised at how much there was to do in between the vocation leveling, monster hunting, and getting all the best items I could find, and I never really felt too overwhelmed, which is saying something with how bloated some games are these days. Now, let's move on to my final thoughts and closing comments. Dragon Quest III, without a doubt, blew any expectations and notions I had about this game out of the water. While so many games go for spectacle and scale and try to be over the top, Dragon Quest is a triumph in its depth and simplicity. The story was simple and easy to understand, and with the remake adding in the new Ortega lore, it really helps tie things together and make a lot of sense, and it also had that tension and build you look for in a good story as well. The world felt big, and traveling from town to town, fighting a variety of enemies, really made me feel glad getting to new towns and talking to the people within, and even partake in a Puff Puff. Its combat was exactly what I was looking for, with its simple and fun turn-based system that allows both veteran and new players to excel. And, by the endgame, I felt extremely powerful, as you should in any JRPG. Its overall tone felt pretty lighthearted, and its humor modeled after Monty Python just works in the context of the game. The soundtrack as you go from town to town and dungeon to dungeon really helped drive immersion, and flying on Ramiya just felt so peaceful. Massive credit to Koichi Sugiyama and Yuji Hori. I apologize. I wasn't familiar with your game. I won't deny that with Akira Toriyama's passing, it did help push me in the direction to finally play this game, and his art style and influence is simply undeniable. He just has a certain aura to his works that I seem to enjoy immensely. The same goes for Dragon Ball as well as Dragon Quest. When I saw his name in the credits, I did get a little choked up since his passing was so sudden, and he had a great impact on my life. I may at some point go back and try the original, but it's night and day between the two versions. And while some may prefer the original, I think that this remake is excellent, and I would put it up there as one of the best remakes I've ever played. If you haven't tried this game, I can't recommend it enough, and it's available on every platform now, and you really won't regret trying it. I hope that you've enjoyed this video, so please remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Snar Soldier 17, out.